Will it be Lucanol, bicycle reflectors, or Agatha Christie? I'm Toby Hadoke, and I'm choosing my favourite things about a Doctor Who story in this positive podcast, Happy Times and Places.
Hello, Toby. My name is Gary Russell, and I have had one or two small involvements with Doctor Who over the years, nothing particularly major or important compared to most. So the story I've given you to go away and watch is Robots of Death.
Are we ready to press play on the Robots of Death, Episode 3? Yes, please. Let's do so in 3, 2, 1... And here we go. Yes. What a good story it is. So, yeah, I may be reading some missives I have from my patrons with observations or questions about the Robots of Death. I don't know, just trying to mix it up a bit. But I might not need it, because pretty much everything about this story is worth talking about, and talking about in a positive way. And it's a slightly different font, isn't it, for this season, for the title? She's going. Yeah. Is that close-up of the robot in the... that opens the episode? Is that in the edited together video version? I'm not sure that it is. We had some... They're not pliers, are they? What are they called? Snippers. There's a name for them. Dask is using very 20th century equipment to cut the Zeta links. But I why do you need a laser cannon when a bit of, or a Laserson probe when a bit of a, if you really need to cut a cable, a bit of brute force is what you'll need to do it. It's funny, those shots of the robots where bits of their heads disappear, or in that case, one just sort of moved. It's almost, you sort of think, is that two shots welded together? Well, I wonder why they didn't do it again. I like David Bailey's very clipped, straightforward, professional Dask. I'm sure Dask knows where to look for the damage. Does that mean the Doctor knows already? Is he dropping hints? Did he see the bit with the trousers? The Toose's hat is quite a remarkable thing, isn't it? I'd be interested to know how practical they were. She's very good at acting her poorly wrist here, Pamela Salem. I really buy that wrist really hurts. Look at that. That's a brilliant piece of sort of pain acting. Pamela Salem is a terrific actress, and she always plays rather grand people. Look for a man with scars. And I thought she might be quite aloof. I've had the pleasure of being in a room with her, and she was absolutely lovely, very, very cheerful. I love the way that David Collins does that bit where he goes, I saw the reports. Oh no, I was there. So he's a detective. He saw the reports because yeah. So is the suggestion that he wasn't actually there, but he's done his homework. It's just they obviously don't have sort of the internet on Caldor City, which is fine. They've spent all of their industry at making fancy clothes, but they look comfortable, those clothes, and you can move about in them. I think he's very clever, says the Doctor. Yes, I think he's very clever too, Doctor Who. And it's because if you think about it, the Doctor's actually only been there about 15 minutes. But already they've got some sort of rapport going on. Look at that Phoenix from the mud. My metaphor ran away with me. And they're having and here we get a new subplot. If you see how shifty David Collings is being when he's offered whatever SV7 has just offered him. He doesn't like the robots. I think that's a brilliant concept, the idea of robophobia. It's a fantastic science fiction concept because robots are a staple of science fiction. Phobias are a thing. The way that it is explained about how robots not having body language and that can make us feel uneasy is utterly plausible, and becomes a sort of key issue with plot and character. And I think, just when you think this story can't get any better or be using its core ingredients any more imaginatively, it bungs that into the mix. And again, let's just throw in a little bit of how the sand miner works. You get the water from the recycling, but we have these little things that we pop in it to give it a bit of flavour. I love the empathy that Leela has with Poole here, where she's saying, "Why do you do it?" She asks it with, and I love the way that he says, "Money, Leela." He plays that beautifully. It's a lovely scene between the two of them. And I know that Louise was very fond of David Collings. I think this was the first time they met, but they stayed in touch. She wrote a very nice tribute for me when I did an article for him about Doctor Who magazine about this time last year. Poor David died just before the very first lockdown, so was not able to have a proper send-off, sadly, but I was able to talk to his son, Sam, and to his wife, Karen, and to Louise. Sam Collings, David Collings' son, is a marvellous actor. But David Collings was a great servant to Doctor Who. For many years, he was the great doctor that never was, and then Big Finish gave him a chance to play the Doctor, where he played a doctor for whom it had all gone wrong, one less fettered by morality. And he does, and because he's silver and sapphire and steel, so, now, is that suggesting to us? I think that's sort of going, you should start mistrusting Dask, even though it's his job to have the corpse marker, and he knows in episode 1 what the corpse marker is. And yeah, Paul says, "What are you doing?" "My job." So we're going, we would be going, is this a sleight of hand? Is this suggesting to us we should be suspicious of Dask? Well, yeah, all very subtle and all very nice, but we've seen his trousers. Kaiser Soze, he isn't. The best trick the devil ever played was not to show us his trousers. Ha ha ha. Look at that. Is that the robot's hand is slightly melted, as I've always thought, but I've had a question here, and looking at it now, no, it's sort of bits of goo, isn't it? It's not just blood. I thought maybe it was blood on a slightly melted robot-y fingers. That, in the robot, when it had killed presumably Borg, had its fingers mashed up, and the blood is sort of stuck to mashed up fingers. But actually, looking at it there, oh yeah, and if the trousers weren't enough, here's Dask's eyes and nose and whispery voice. It's like the Police Squad episode called "The Butler Did It," But somebody has sent, yes, it's Paul Taylor Greaves, who said, "I'm watching it now. When Paul sees the damaged robot's hand, which triggers his breakdown, how did they get away with the blood and matter that is on the hand? Clearly it's bits of Borg's innards. Grim stuff for a Saturday tea time." Yeah, it is pretty grim, and I suppose you need it to set off Paul's breakdown. I like the stutter of the robot. That's obviously isn't that a beautiful mask? And the fact that it's silver and the lighting. Duncan Brown's the lighting designer on this, isn't he? And he's a superb lighting guy. He does the lighting for Genesis of the Daleks as well, which is also beautifully lit. Tanya Rogers doesn't get a credit for this episode because she's only a corpse. That's not always the way, but it does lead me into Mark Owen's question. Have you ever tracked down Tanya Rogers? She seems to be one of the few actors to have eluded the attention of Who researchers in the years following her small number of listed credits. I hope she's well and happy, says Mark. I do too, Mark. As far as I know, she's in Birmingham, and I think people have written to her, just not heard back. So maybe she just doesn't. For some people, an acting career is just a moment and the least interesting thing that they've done to them. And he, Mark also mentions another Doctor Who actress that we've never tracked down, but maybe we'll talk about that when we do that story. Please do not. I love the Doctor and D84 together. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Gregory de Polnay, but I remember there was a video that I loved when I was a student and I was poor and I saved up for it from Real Time Pictures, is it called? I Was a Doctor Who Monster. Right up my street, interviewing the lesser known, the lesser celebrated people, including, and it was all the people that had played the monsters. And Gregory de Polnay was one of them. And he said, when this canine came along, I was really pissed off. He said that they didn't ask me to do the voice. And I think that's a reasonable thing to be pissed off about. But Greg has become a great drama teacher. And in fact, when it was Doctor Who's 30th anniversary, some mates of mine let me have a Doctor Who party at their house because they had a telly and a video. I lived in a rubbish bedsit on my own. Bless them. I was so keen to inflict Doctor Who on other people, and my mates went along with it, and they bought me a Sevens Cyberman, and God, I forget, it's unlocking memories I've not remembered. And they let me sort of program a night of Doctor Who, and one of the ones we watched was the Robots of Death, and D84 went down very well, I have to say. And this is the episode, of course, where he says, "Please do not throw hands at me." I think it's not this episode; it's next episode. I think it's this one, and that went down particularly well. And one of my friends, and it's just reminded me. I sometimes, how nice of my friends to indulge me. I had good friends there, and I think sometimes you take for granted the people in your life. So thanks to those guys for letting me program a Doctor Who night in their house that they indulged, and they bought me a Cyberman. It wasn't my birthday, it was Doctor Who's, but they knew how important Doctor Who was to me. And so this was 1993, and yeah, Please Do Not Throw Hands at Me went down so well that I was on a film set. Me and one of the fellows who came to that my dear friend Mark, we were both used in a film called Monk Dawson. Both had a handful of lines in they filmed a bit of it to get the funding, and then they filmed the rest of it, and we were in the bit they did to get the funding. And at one point, I think somebody threw a rubber glove or something at one of us. And I said, "Please do not throw hands at me," as a joke to Mark, and we laughed because it was a shared thing. And then the grip laughed and went, "Robots of Death," and he was a grip called John Head, Head and Hands. And I've never met him since, but very occasionally I'll do a job and somebody will find out I'm a Doctor Who fan. I go, "Oh, I know this bloke. He's a really top. He's a grip." And it's not called John Head, is he? They say, who's a big Doctor Who fan, because we got on really well for that couple of days I was on that film, and I consider him sort of a chum or whatever, but I've met him once for that very short period. But we had a meeting of a confluence of the right obscure reference dropped at the right point in a piece of filmmaking. And as I say, he keeps sort of creeping back by name, but without us actually ever meeting. And I think I've met more people that know him. And obviously a bit like me, amongst his circle of friends, he's the Doctor Who guy. So John, if you're listening, we must meet up again in another, well, let's not leave it 93. Gosh, that's nearly 30 years ago. It feels like yesterday. That's a great shot through the legs. Somebody who's just dropped in at that point might wonder what we're talking about. But and of course the robot's eye view. Look at the lighting in that shot. The beautiful way that the pinks are reflected on those robot masks aren't just a great piece of Art Deco design. They're actually very useful in terms of what they bring to proceedings, in terms of what the robots actually have to do, which is to be impassive and scary and beautiful and decadent to reflect the society, but also scary as Doctor Who monsters. And their scariness comes from the fact that despite the beauty of their design, there is the thing that causes robophobia, which is the lack of nuance and facial expression and body language. Very, very clever. And again, Duncan Brown, the lighting designer, deserves some credit for that. Pamela Salem is very, very classy. And when I first saw this, it was before Remembrance of the Daleks, so it was a joy when she, came back into the series. She, like Rob Edwards, is also a voice of Zoanon. So clearly they were, when they were rehearsing for Robots of Death, it was like, you want a couple of quid to be a computer voice. So she counts as being in the 3 stories. But yes, please do not throw hands at me. That hasn't happened yet. I'm not always going to match my words to the pictures, but I will try. For those of you that aren't watching along, I shall try and make sure we're, pretty much where we are in this episode. This bit is a fabulous scene that I hadn't remembered from the book at all, and is just glorious. I heard a cry, that was me. and it's not just the voice. Gregory de Paulnay's voice is great. It's the body language as well. It's the way he sort of says his thing and then comes forward, says his thing again, pauses, takes in the information, and with exactly the same tone, because he's a robot, he's going to say the same thing over and over again. And a human would get more insistent. If you repeat something, it's natural, isn't it, to add some variation, even if it's a bit more intensity or loudness. The beauty of that is and as I say, I didn't remember that from the book at all. And it's fabulous. And Baker is clearly quite cross. D84, as in the Doctor. And this is again, it's we have the bicycle reflectors being handed out now as sort of death coins, but death coins in marigolds. That's what bicycle reflectors in marigolds. That close up was, but marigold sprayed silver. Marigolds, I don't know if that translates over to the States. Any viewers abroad? And there are a few. A marigold is a rubber glove, which is what is obviously the robot's hands are made of, but sprayed silver. And yet, in a great piece of Doctor Who, you can have a whacking great close-up of a silver marigold with some bicycle reflectors, and it still be sort of chilling threat of death. This was a bit that me and a couple of friends always used to go, the boing. And I have to say, now you're showing off, I think is slightly modern for Leela. I don't know, or is it? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong there. It does stick out a bit for me, and I'm not quite sure why. I remember that shot was slowed down and used in Resistance is Useless, which was a documentary that celebrated a repeat season of Doctor Who largely by mocking it. I can do whole podcasts about that. Gerald Ratner was clearly a program advisor. Let's not get into that. But I like the even though if you look closely, you can see how it's done the heartbeat through the curtain to show the robots, seeing that Leela is alive and well, as it were. This is a beautiful line. Punch a 6-inch hole in armor plate, or pluck the crystals from a snowflake one by one. It's a wonderful thing, and it's basically the iPhones of industrial tools, isn't it? It's probably got loads of things you don't need it to do as well. But beautifully explained and introduced. I can't use it. As he said, I cannot speak. Oh, he's just so delightful. And again, in the book, he was quite an important character, but and a sort of dogged assistant, if you like, to that. But you had no idea he was quite so lovable. But he's lovable because he's sort of strange. It's the innocence of D84 that is so beautiful. I love Tussy's boudoir. It's quite the thing, isn't it? Leather pillows. She's got a leather punch bag for a pillow and a shell for a bedhead. Whatever you like, whatever turns you on, Toots. Did I go off on one then? I think I probably did. Yeah, but there you see, the Doctor says take Leela Dask Pool. So he has been dropping hints that he knows it's Dask, but the one he doesn't mention there is Ivanov, presumably because he knows he's under guard. Russell Hunter hasn't actually been in this episode yet. He's got quite a quiet week this week. He comes in right at the end, doesn't he? Oh, look at that. She opens the door and the robot is there. That is very, very grim and brilliant. And this looks like it hurts when she whacks it. She does a pretty decent job there. And of course he takes his hand off, which heralds the wonderfully and rightly celebrated line we get later on. Look at that, clunk. Oh yes, yeah, Leela with the spadoink with the knife. That's what I was thinking about. There's not very often a sound effect from the sound effects library lets Doctor Who down. There's a moment in the Horns of Nimon, isn't there, where there's that. It's got a name, hasn't it? The boing. But yeah, and I suppose it would make that noise, the knife, as it goes into the metal of the robot. But it just seems a little comical. That's okay. Well, it's all right to have the odd unintentional laugh as well. But I'm only being picky because otherwise this is just going to be me watching it and just loving it because. I generally do. Again, the lighting is so good here. I genuinely buy her fear. She's really... And I think women get a rough deal in Doctor Who a lot of the time, having to be imperiled and screaming. And it's hard to do right. But I totally believe Toos's peril in this. And later on, when the robot's trying to kill her and she's pleading with it, is really, really believable and really well done. David Collings, I think, has a hard trick to pull off here. I love that shot of him under the table and his knee there. I remember in the book, I didn't quite grasp what had happened to Poole. I read it when I was way too young, and I think it's a shame because Poole is such a great character. It's sad that from here on in the drama he's reduced to a sort of gibbering wreck because I liked him as a sort of cynical lurker. But it's important for the story, and it gives it that it gives it all sorts of different layers and plot. But it's a shame that it comes at the cost of a very interesting character. And in fact, and it's a shame that Borg and Zilda die so soon as well because. I think we could have stood more of them and their story, but that's a good sign when you're packed full that you feel the loss of the bits that go away. Poor old Poole, and it's not really clear in the story what happens to him, but I know that there's been spin-offs from Big Finish and other production houses, haven't there? Using all of the original actors, which I like. There's been life beyond the Robots of Death, even if not in TV Doctor Who. I like the makeup job on Russell Hunter here, and I love his reaction to seeing the robot behind him. It's great. And I like the sort of understanding between these two. I know Michael Bryant said that in the script Ivanov was a bit butcher than this, and that he cast Russell Hunter against type. But I think it's a decision that really pays off. There we go. Look, Tom Baker's face fades into the titles. It's not a cut. Again, I don't think there's another Tom Baker story where that happens, and it happens in episodes 1 and 3 of the Robots of Death, and that was the end of episode 3. Cast list is a little bit shorter because a few people have been... Because John Bleasdale, who played one of the robots, I remember I did a corporate video once for something, and he'd been used by these people quite a lot. He died before I got to see it. And I think it dropped into conversation that I was a Doctor Who fan. It always seems to come up. And the guy, he was the lead robot in a Doctor Who, and it was John Bleasdale. So there we go. That's episode 3 of The Robots of Death. So I will pause before we go to episode 4. I've got to see what Gary Russell's favourite thing about episode 3 of The Robots of Death is after I have nominated mine. And I think I am going to cheat. Interestingly, Please Do Not Throw Hands at Me isn't in episode 3. It's in episode 4, which sort of solves a dilemma, because going into this, I thought, oh, might I choose that? I mean, it's only one line, but I think I've explained in the wrong episode why that has echoed through the ages for me. But I think that I heard a cry scene. I know it's nothing. It's a short scene, adds nothing to the story, but I just love it. I love the performance. I love its very existence. I love the way that it's done. I love the performances. I love the way it's totally surprising. And I sort of love the way there's nothing quite like it in all of Doctor Who. So the scene where T84 just keeps saying, I heard a cry, and the Doctor keeps saying, oh, that was me, is my favourite thing. And that's not damning with faint praise, because I love so much about this story. But I'm choosing that scene. And that sort of cheats because, but it doesn't cheat to my favour, because Gary has already chosen D84, so it's unlikely he's going to choose that again, because I'm assuming his choosing of D84 covers that. But I don't think I could live with myself if I hadn't chosen something, including D84, who I can't choose as my favourite thing, because Gary's already done it, so that would be pointless, even though this is pointless because I know he's not going to choose this bit either, so I may as well have just said D84, but I'm sticking to the sort of arbitrary rules I've created. So that scene, and Gary Russell is going to tell me what he likes about episode 3.
Episode 3, I'm not a sort of visceral horror person. I don't like horror. I don't like body horror particularly, or slasher movies or anything like that. And yet again, watching this in 1977 when it went out, one moment stuck out at me as being incredibly powerful and very memorable in the story. And that's the bit in episode 3 where Poole goes into the little area where all the dead robots have been deactivated by Dask, and he presses his little thing and the thing rotates, and there's a robot there who doesn't have a nameplate, the only robot in the entire story not to have a nameplate, and his head's all crushed, and he looks down, the camera pans down with him, and he sees the hand, and on the hand is blood dripping, and on the edge of the fingers is brain matter and a bit of skull and a bit of a loose hair, because this is the robot that killed Borg. And as is said later, Borg obviously put up quite a good fight. And I just remember at the time thinking that was one of the most visceral and darkest things I'd ever seen in Doctor Who. Blood in Doctor Who isn't that unusual, but to see it with actual gunk, actual brain matter on a finger, I loved it. I thought that was great. So that's my favourite thing in episode 3.
Interesting, because I remember, being very excited, because in The Power of Kroll, when Thorne gets killed, you see blood, but you have to look really quickly. And then there's Kondo when he gets his stomach blown out. So, that sort of thing is very exciting when I was younger. But I remember sort of taking that bit slightly for granted. And I don't know why, because I would get excited by anything that would make Doctor Who seem adult, especially when it was, the victim of so much Mickey taking. But through doing this and watching it tonight and having my missive here from Paul Taylor Greaves, and then Gary choosing it as this thing, I'm reveling in this sort of new experience of seeing a bit I've seen so many times and rather taken for granted, and actually slightly misreading, as I explained. I thought it was mangled robot finger. Has given me a newfound appreciation and a new understanding, and I think next time when I watch The Robots of Death for pleasure, that bit might hit me in a slightly different way. And isn't that beautiful? And isn't that what being a Doctor Who fan is all about? And watching these things over and over again, which is why I've seen The Robots of Death more times than I've read some of the great works of literature. But I don't care. So yes, Borg's brains on a rubber glove. That's a good choice, Gary. So I don't get a point for that. Oh, did you hear a cry? Yeah, that was me. Cheerio. Sadly, since I recorded this commentary, David Bailey, who played Dask, who I mentioned quite a lot over the 4 episodes and in the present tense, has passed away at the age of 83. Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which was presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest was Gary Russell, who you can find on Twitter at Twilight Streets. Thanks to patrons, who this episode are Mark Aldridge, Kit Allen, Sebastian April, Tilt Oriza, ARCH Presents CIC, Simon Ash, Martin Bellum, James Blackett, Robin Bland, Kyle Bors, David Brody, Hugh Buchtman, Anthony Carroll, no, that's not a stutter, there are 2 of them, Richard Chalk, Susan Christian, what are the odds, eh? Steve Churchill, Charles Coppin, Paul Colnaghy, Peter Crocker, Sarah Krotzer, Dave Curran, Rob Dawson, Tim Dickinson, and Pete Dillon Trenchard. The music for this podcast is by Dave Gates, and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. I heard a shout-out for the Patreon subscription model, which you can find at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, which is a way of supporting me via a monthly donation from as little as £3, for which you get advance material way in advance of the normal releases. You also get extra exclusive stuff and maybe even a badge. If you can't or don't fancy that, you could also do a one-off donation at ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke. Anything is appreciated. Please rate 5 stars if you can, and review as positively as possible these at whichever outlet you get them from. And if you want to see a video version, go to my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. The video one drops a few months after the audio one, but, have a look if you want to see what lampshade I was watching it under.